You're watching the 5 Minute Bark Podcast on YouTube. If you like this episode, you just may like many more. Subscribe today by clicking the red subscribe button in the top right-hand corner. We're live on the 5 Minute Bark Podcast today, and we have Brad Hart here today, whom I just met at Internet Marketing Party here in San Diego through Nicholas Barrow and Amanda Barrow. They're everywhere. They're like the Facebook, I don't know, they have their own private jet or something. They're all over the place. But I got a chance to actually share some time with Brad, and very interesting. And I said, can you come on my show? So we have him here today, and this is actually our second take because this is getting good. We have some good content for you guys here today. And Brad has a lot to share, and he's got this company called
Make More Marbles.
MakeMoreMarbles.com. And the story he told me about this is really interesting because, you know, in life you kind of realize some different things that shape the rest of your life. He comes from a very successful business, I believe, in hedge funds.
Yeah, and trading options and stocks on the U.S. equity exchange. Yep.
And now he's going to be sharing with you what he does now. So there's like a complete shift. And I've seen a lot of that in my show here today. So Brad Hart, welcome to the 5 Minute Bark, and share a little bit about who you are, why you went from hedge funds to marbles.
Yeah, well, it's not a linear transition, but nothing I guess ever is. And thank you first, Dennis, for having me on the 5 Minute Bark, and thank you everybody out here for listening. I appreciate it. I just hope that I can be a vessel for the message that you need today, whatever that is, whatever you're needing in life right now. So, you know, when I was, let me back up. So when I was 16 years old, my grandfather, who had been a World War II veteran, was needing to go into an assisted care facility to, you know, wind down the rest of his life. You know, he couldn't care for himself anymore. There's nobody that could really care for him. And it was up to us as a family to find a way where we could make that happen, right? And I remember we had to really just search out all of his assets and just be able to afford what, you know, would be a very expensive proposition. You know, he had the GI grant and the veterans bills and the VA and all that, but what I realized was that we quickly would run out of money very fast if we didn't think of something. So we worked it out, but in the course of doing that, I learned a couple things about my grandfather I'd never known before. You know, my grandfather never talked about money. He never talked about the war. He never talked about anything except for, you know, his lifestyle and, you know, the things that he had seen. And he really loved to plant and to cook. He taught me how to cook. And I didn't know that he had any money or any means, but he never made a big deal out of it either. But it turned out he's worth a couple $1 million. And it turned out his father was worth a couple $100 million, and they had a fight. So my grandfather was in a tiff with my great-grandfather. And when my great-grandfather died, he left all of that money to the maid. And she was from Colombia, and she went back to Colombia. And we're talking like almost $1 billion by today's standards. You know, a lot of land and orchards and different things. And, you know, my great-grandfather and my grandfather never did reconcile in their lives. But what I learned was that his uncle, my great uncle, Al, had invested in things like Standard Oil and Bell Telephone in the early turn of the century era, around the time of the Great Depression. And those companies, by the time my grandfather was retired, had turned into 15 different companies, you know, like AT&T, Verizon, ExxonMobil, Texaco. They're all, you know, came down from those big monopolies back in the day in the telecom and the oil industry. So what I learned was that a few $100s, you know, or the equivalent today, wisely invested over one generation can make you wealthy. And that, you know, started a lifelong fascination with stocks and the stock market and trading. And eventually I got into real estate in a big way when I lived in New York City. But, you know, the thing that I saw most was that, you know, money was something to be treated with respect. And if you treated it with respect, it could grow and you could invest and you could create the income that you need to live your life however you want it. So that was a really powerful lesson for me because we grew up hand to mouth. My dad was injured when I was 2 years old. He actually was in a truck accident coming down a hill, and the load shifted on the back of this lumber truck, came in through the back of the cab and pinned him to the steering wheel. So he was unable to walk. He was crawling around on a mechanic's creeper for 6 months until he got the surgery to be able to walk again. But he never lived another day where he wasn't in pain. And eventually he medicated and drank himself to death. You know, from that age until I was about 16, he held it together and helped raise me with my mom, who was working. But, you know, after I left home, it really got bad. You know, he started to spiral. So by the time I was 24 and he passed away, you know, I realized first and foremost that I had a long legacy that I had to live up to, or at least that was my story at the time. I was living somebody else's life. I was living the life of the 13 generations that had brought me to the place I was today. living in the same town from the 1690s. It was an incredible lifestyle and story. But now here I am at the very end of that lineage, and I'm still living the lives of dead people, building, real estate and building wealth and working 24/7 around the clock sometimes. But those initial seeds planted, I think, what was going to be a breakthrough later. And I want to tell you a little bit about that, Dennis, but I want to take a break just to see if you have any questions for me.
No, I just appreciate that you're sharing such a life-changing story, because we all have a story, and sometimes we don't find it until too late. Maybe we find it right now. We were just kind of talking about this earlier before with Scott Peter, about story. It's all about story. And that story has now motivated you to do what you're doing here today.
Right.
Of course you wanted to, set the bar for income, but it brought you here today to what you're doing now. You're just catapulting your giving. Right?
Yeah. So it's a funny thing, Dennis, when I started my fund, and it kind of started in a roundabout way. I didn't set out to start a hedge fund. I just set out to make friends, really. When I was a kid, I didn't have a lot of friends. And one of the ways I learned to do that was through mastermind groups. And I would join a lot of these mastermind groups. And I would be the guy that would get on a plane and go to where people lived and learn about them and their dreams and their hopes and desires and meet their families and really just seek to ask the question, how can I leave this person or this situation better off than I found it? And in doing so, an incredible thing started to happen in my life. As the more I gave, the more started to flow into my life. And if I did so without reservation, I couldn't connect the dots looking forward. Like if I help this person, this might happen, or da-da-da-da-da. But if I just kept giving, the amount that would come back was incredible. And I had to learn a very important lesson at that time in my life, was that you need to have a balance of giving and receiving. And abundance is not just giving or receiving, right? We talked about that flow and that capacity. It doesn't matter if you have all the flow in the world coming at you. If you can't receive it, if you can't be grateful for it, you can't, you don't have the team or the infrastructure in order to be able to support that. It's as if you didn't have it at all. So I see so many people running around today trying to create wealth and trying to create abundance, and they can create a lot of flow through giving, and that's great. And I want to encourage that if you don't experience enough flow in your life. But I also want to challenge you to focus on how you expand yourself and how you receive and how you increase your capacity, because it's one of my core values, and ultimately we can increase our capacity collectively to create more in the world for everybody. Right.
It's funny. You're talking about this right now. The 5 Minute Bark podcast was founded on my second episode. If you go way back, it's called Giving and Receiving. I'm from the East Coast. You're from the East Coast. We don't take, we just give.
Yes.
It's just part of our structure. We can talk about East Coast all the time, but it's something myself and my friends really struggle with. And it's something really hard for even to me in this day and age to adapt to. Like for example, I have an Airbnb, and this guy I just gave him a ride this morning, and he's like, "Do you mind if I tip you?" And I'm like, "No, dude, no. You know what I mean?" I couldn't accept it. I couldn't accept those. And he wanted to give me $40 for a tip. I'm like, "Dude, you already paid me, hundreds of dollars to stay with me. Don't worry about it, but he wanted to give. He left stuff in the fridge, like, drink me. I'm a, green drink, and here's some organic grapes I got. And it's like, I'm like, I don't want to eat his stuff. I don't want, and that's a problem a lot of us have, and so what I'm getting is you're helping people convert that. Yeah.
And people come to me all the time and they say, how can I do more business? How can I make more money? And I have to use the analogy of the pitcher full of water versus the glass full of water. Let's say the pitcher is 64 ounces and the glass is only 8 ounces. You can pour water out of that pitcher all day long, but if you don't have the capacity to receive it, it's just going to spill everywhere. And it's going to be a hazard, right? You can sub water for marbles. If you have to replace a marble, add a marble. Are the right marbles in the jar or in the container that you're trying to fill? And how do you expand the capacity? Right? Because ultimately life wants to give you everything that you asked for. That's what it's designed to do. And provided you're willing to ask for it and give and be a generative person, life supports that, which supports life. And this might get into a little bit of woo-woo territory. And yes, I don't have like science and data and hard facts to point at it, but the experience of my life has been the more I give, the more I receive. And the secret to living, as Tony Robbins says, is to give. The secret to living is giving. So, if you want to make more marbles, if you don't want to just grab for what's already there, You truly have to give. And one of the ways you can do this, I have a couple of cool little, I love alliteration, I love acronyms. So I have one that's called CROPS, connecting resources, opportunities, people, and systems together, right? So that you can help increase your income, your influence, your impact.
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, it's called CROPS, right? CROPS, that's connecting resources, opportunities, people, and systems together to essentially increase flow towards you, which will help increase your income, your impact, your influence, your investments, and your infrastructure to receive, your capacity to receive, right? Those are my top 5 values, is communication, cooperation, compassion, capacity, and contribution. I had to look down. Sorry, I didn't get them all in one shot.
That's okay.
But yeah, I like to have these little like reminders in my life. Like how do I sort the things that I do in my life? And one of the things that entrepreneurs really struggle with is focus and finding their flow. So I'm always working with people through the Make More Marbles masterminds and mentorship programs and the trips and the retreats that we take in order to find ways in which they can contribute more, in order to find ways where they can communicate better, in order to find ways where they can have more compassion for themselves and for the other people in their life. And in doing so, you find that you can always generate more. Life is an abundant place, but if you perceive scarcity, if that becomes your frame, then guess what? That's what's going to show up. Whatever you believe to be true, whatever you value, that becomes what you believe. And whatever you believe becomes your thoughts. Whatever you think becomes your words. Whatever you say becomes your actions. And then your actions become your habits. And over time, that creates your reality, right? So if you want to change your reality now, and take a look at your circumstances, and you don't love your circumstances now, you have to take a look at reality and say, okay, what am I valuing and believing that's leading to the thoughts, that's leading to the actions and the words, and it's creating those habits that's creating the reality that I currently occupy? And how do I go back and shift that so that eventually my reality will match what I value and I believe? And it's always happening. This is a natural process that's always happening. But most people, they start with 1 or 2 or 3, but they don't see the linear progression. They don't see how it all flows together. And they're taking advice, and this is my favorite point to hit on with the Make More Marbles message. They're taking advice from people who are living in their flow and their strengths, but there are very different personality types. There are very different types of entrepreneurs that if you don't focus on what you're great at and your flow and your strengths, you will never ever be able to implement the same advice as them, because a creative person will be just like, go start another idea. A person who's a star, who's really good with ideas and people, will be very social butterfly. They'll just say, go out and talk to more people. A person who's amazing at finding the right people at the right time will say, yeah, just go out and make some deals. And a person that's, really good at, let's say, timing and numbers, like a Warren Buffett or Ben Graham, will say, yeah, just wait for the right time and then pounce. And when you have all your numbers and you know your numbers and you know exactly when the right time is, you'll be able to make something happen. And then somebody who's like a mechanic, like a Mark Zuckerberg, for example, they might look at it and say, all right, I'm going to go in a room somewhere and build the next Facebook or the next Amazon. And I'm going to take ideas and numbers and I'm going to put them together. And in the process, it's going to create a better way to do things. And all of those are valuable. And all of those lead to being successful as an entrepreneur, but not in and of themselves. You need ideas, you need people, you need amazing timing, and you need great numbers people to make a business work. If you don't have all those 4 things, and also leads, sales, value, and operations, which is the management of resources, if you don't have those things, you're going to struggle because you have a very expensive hobby. Something's missing. Something's not transmuting from start to finish, because businesses, and this is where I'm going with this, they exist to serve people in some capacity. If you want to increase your flow, if you want to increase your capacity and ultimately your wealth, you have to be able to provide more solutions, more help, solve more problems, and satisfy more desires for more people. And if you could do that, I met Sarah Blakely recently. You know who that is? She's the founder of Spanx, and she's one of the first self-made women billionaires. And she's an incredible woman. In fact, my assistant Savannah was like, "Oh my God, you're going to meet Sarah Blakely! I can't believe it!" She was freaking out, and I'm like, "That's great. I didn't know much about her. I'm not her target market." But when I got to meet Sarah, it was really wonderful to see her and how she moves in the world. And nobody needs $1 billion. You couldn't spend that kind of money in 50 lifetimes. No. Right? And it keeps replenishing itself because they invest it wisely and they diversify risk. And I could talk about that forever. But, the thing about Sarah that I noticed was that her vision was big enough to encompass $1 billion worth of value. It wasn't just about her and what she needs. It was about her family, her tribe, her community, the people that she wanted to serve. And that in itself attracted $1 billion worth of value. Does that make sense? Because it's totally all an energy exchange.
It is. And the funny thing is most people will cut that energy off when it's happening. I've done it many times. And then when you just open up the energy, it's kind of scary because it comes really, really quickly.
Yes.
I mean, I was at the event this past weekend, whatever it's called. I don't even know the name. It's traffic conversion. And I just had this 4 or 5 hours where I was just open.
Yes.
And I was sitting down at my, my little thing there, and people were just coming up to me. Hey, Dennis. Like, and the people next to me, like, are you famous? I'm like, I'm just doing my work. But I'm just you can just feel your energy is just open. You know what I mean? Do you ever have that feeling like
it's just extremely attractive to other people? Absolutely.
And, I'm getting people, wire transfer me, or PayPaling me $1,000 for coming on my show and doing this and doing that. I mean, it was just, templates were being sold in my ClickFunnels marketplace. And I mean, all that, it was like, I want to hold on to this, but somehow you cut it off sometimes. But people that perfect that energy flow and opening it up, right? Continue it, and the wealth comes, and the giving comes, and
and I think it's an important thing to realize that the flow already exists. You can just tap into it, right? There's billions of dollars changing hands every day. And it's like a river, and you can go grab a bucket and take whatever you need. And eventually you can begin to create the infrastructure, right? The raging river is not just, you and your bucket that may have a hole in it. It could be, you can divert it and create crops and, irrigate, or you can set up multiple buckets and catch raindrops. Like, there's so much flow in the world. It's just, how are you going to direct it towards you? And then do you have the capacity to receive it? Does your team have the capacity to receive it? Does your company have the capacity to receive it? We all want to look at Steve Jobs or Bill Gates and say, that's Microsoft or that's Apple. But in reality, those companies are hundreds of thousands of people and millions of customers around the world that are adding value to each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, take an example. I mean, we've all watched them, the keynotes from Steve Jobs. He'd start out with numbers and he'd be like Humpty Dumpty about them. Yeah, we did $60 billion, and then but let's talk about this iPad that just came out, and he didn't care about the numbers at all. I mean, he's just about giving, creating solutions for people. He was all about like people and solutions, and the money just poured.
And that's a man who's living in his flow.
Yes.
And then he's surrounding himself with people who are put in flow by doing the things that he's not great at, but which are still necessary in order to have a thriving business. And that's a key lesson, is that any solopreneurs out there, any small teams, make sure you have all those bases covered. And as you grow, make sure you have the capacity to handle the flow that you're generating. Because if you're a giver, the flow is going to come naturally. It's going to attract towards you. Yep. Right? And that's the only real way to be extremely successful, is to be a giver. Great givers gain. That's BNI. They're a local networking chapter in a lot of different towns. But
there's a bunch of them around here.
Yeah, they're great. And their whole thing is givers gain. And how can we serve you? They were always asking the question I'm asking is, how can I leave this situation or person better off than I found it? And if you do that in your life, you're going to have so much coming at you. So many relationships, so many ideas, so much money, so much, incredible people that you can basically begin to direct, right? That's really what an entrepreneur does. They are directors of flow and creators of capacity.
I love that. Can you repeat it? I love that.
Those are, an entrepreneur is simply somebody, I mean, the traditional definition is somebody who moves areas of high risk, resources from areas of high risk into areas of low risk. I'm sorry. Let me go back.
You got it. Rewind it.
So the traditional definition of an entrepreneur is somebody who moves resources from areas of low yield to areas of high yield. But it's also somebody who moves resources from areas of high risk to low risk. That's more of an investor mindset. And you need both to really be wealthy and successful, to have your money work for you. But the thing that's really interesting is that when you talk about flow and capacity, what an entrepreneur really is, in my definition, is somebody who can direct flow and create more capacity to utilize and capture and divert that flow. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I just like it because it's the simplest of who I am, who you are, and who everybody in this room is. It's just really amazing. So let's talk about where this is all going. Your company.
Yeah.
Where do you see it going, and where do you see the most impact? It's obviously entrepreneurs.
Sure.
Yeah. Obviously, you're just running around, talking to people, sharing this incredible information. Talk more about what's going on for you.
The Make More
business part.
Yeah, the business part. The Make More Marvel's mission is to serve and support entrepreneurs at its core, right? That's what I care about. That's what I value. And I've been to the top of the mountain, I've made some money. And what I realized very quickly is that, money without fulfillment is really failure, right? If you're at the top of the mountain alone and you don't have anybody to share it with, it might as well not go there at all. It's just gonna be a lot of pain and struggle. But when you're in flow and you can create something amazing that also encompasses the vision of a lot of people and enroll them into that vision, it becomes amazing. So, what I would like to do with Make More Marbles is to be a resource for entrepreneurs to understand who they are as individuals, what their strengths are, and then based on those strengths, surround themselves, partner up with, hire, and get the mentors that they need to give them the advice that's going to serve them best, right? Like Ben Graham and Warren Buffett, they're both accumulators. They're both good at numbers and timing. So it made natural sense for them to work together and have been mentored by one another. But if you get somebody like a Richard Branson to mentor like a Warren Buffett, they have a different style. They have different flows and different strengths. So I think if we can create more entrepreneurs who live in flow, not only will they create more impact in the world, but they'll also create more income for themselves.
That all goes back to like the law of attraction kind of thing. Like
sure.
You attract the things you want to be, and then the ones a lot of people try to pull these people into their groups, yet they don't fit into their groups, and the energy gets all bunched up and bounced off. But it's really important for you to have that energy around you that is valuable to you, what you are and what your purpose is. And if you're out there and you're trying to, which I've done, bring other energies into your area that's not going to be conducive to your energy, then it gets messy.
Yeah. And why, a lot of people struggle with this because it's really easy to fall in the trap of, I got to do everything and I'll get it right. But in reality, you're not only hurting yourself by doing that, you're hurting the person that could step into that role and be in flow and do that thing and learn what they need to learn. You're hurting the world because you're not stepping up into the next version and sharing your gifts. And it's kind of like you're messing yourself up twice and you're messing somebody else up once. It's like a really interesting thing to look at. So growth and contribution really, at the end of the day, are a virtuous cycle. And the more you grow, the more you have to give. And the more you give, the more you have to grow. And ultimately, where we go in life is a result of how much we've grown and how much we've given. Yeah.
On behalf of entrepreneurs out there, I appreciate you taking this mission on to help us.
Yeah,
really,
absolutely. I'm always here. I'm always going to be your advocate and your fiercest leader. And as best I can, I'm going to support you and keep creating more capacity to do so.
Right. Because, we all need it.
Yeah.
Alex Sheffron always says, we need to open up and take that. And sometimes we don't want to because we think we can do it ourselves. We're doing ourselves monsters.
Or we're afraid, right? Yeah. Peter talked about fear in the last podcast. And, I love Peter. I love his events. He's been a friend for a long time. But I think those two go hand in hand, right? We're looking at scarcity for what it is. It's a perception. It may not be real. Sometimes, the plane goes down over the Andes and there's no food and you got to eat the co-pilot. I'm not saying that scarcity doesn't exist, but in reality, we have a more abundant world than we've ever had, right? You look at some of my heroes like Peter Diamandis and what they're doing in the world and showing people that these exponential technologies that are coming we're going to have the ability to provide for more people than we ever have before. But now I believe we also have the responsibility to actually do that. How do we create food, energy, water, and shelter at a basic level for all humans? Maybe in our lifetime. I think that's entirely possible based on what I'm seeing out there in the world, but it takes a change in beliefs and paradigms and perceptions in order to implement that and even believe that it can happen.
Oh yeah. I mean, look at that phone right there. It's like a quarter right here, my iPhone.
Yeah.
15 years ago, that was like a big brick.
Yeah. You have a supercomputer in your pocket that didn't exist 10 years ago. Yeah. And that trip across the country that you now do in 6 hours, you watch 2 movies and you're there. It used to take 3 months and people would die along the way. Yeah. It's an amazing time we live in.
And
it really is.
The amount of things that replaces would fill this room.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
Fax machines, copy machines, magazines, books, videos, movies, everything. I mean, it does everything.
You have the ability to communicate and connect with anybody you want to or need to.
Around the world.
To build your business. And you just need to learn, what are you great at? What are you terrible at and need to either outsource or hire for or partner for? And then how do you get the resources to make that happen, right? First by just helping people, right? Solving people's problems. And then ultimately through scale and corporations and all these different other things that, I've studied at length. I've gone really deep down the rabbit hole and I can help you with. But if you can't get that first part figured out, you're not going to get any momentum. Yeah. And that's really important.
Brad, we're already at our time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I do want to point out, thank you for coming into state and sharing with us here today. I mean, we did this video twice and you just kind of came into this the shift came on, and I appreciate that shift. So I know it made you more vulnerable.
I realized I was up here and I was supposed to be down here.
Yeah.
And when I made that shift, it all flows. When I'm up here, it doesn't flow.
And I can't wait for you to see this video and see how it flows. And our audience noticed the difference as well. So
thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Dennis.
Because that's what the show is all about, is real people, real stories, changing the world. And you're doing that.
Thank you.
I like that. 5 Minute Bark. If you want to find the amazing work that Brad's doing, Brad, where can I find you?
Yeah, so I actually, I took the liberty of creating a free giveaway for people to check out. It's at a page that's made just for your audience. It's at makemoremarbles.com/bark, B-A-R-K. And if you go to that URL, you can pick up a lot of different free resources on productivity, on time management, on finance. I have a great speech that I gave to a mastermind recently about how to manage your money passively. There's all kinds of ideas and strategies to build your business, increase your income, increase your influence, and increase your impact in the world. And I'd love to serve and support you the best way I can. And if you just want to reach out and say hello to me, I can be found on facebook.com/Brad Hart, BRADHART, no spaces, no hyphens, and I'll see you there.
Awesome. Listeners, thanks again for watching here today. It's really important to me and my guests as well that you're listening to us, because this makes us all great. We want to encourage you to listen and learn from these podcasts, as well as subscribe, of course. Subscribe on YouTube and join our videos on there, and also on iTunes. If you want to get the audio version, we're on iTunes at 5 Minute Bark, F-I-V-E, Minute Bark. And thank you for being out there. Really appreciate it. We'll bring on more and more good guests, and they're all some way in some form awesome. So thank you for reaching out. Brad, thank you for coming on the show and also introducing me to our guest that we just interviewed prior to.
Peter Scott, our fearless leader.
Yes.
Thank you, Peter.
Yes.
Appreciate you.
Listeners, thank you. You're watching the 5 Minute Bark podcast on YouTube. If you like this episode, you just may like many more. Subscribe today by clicking the red subscribe button in the top right-hand corner.